Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. My name is Siti Hodijah. I am a student 7th semester of English Education Department at STKAP Muhammadiyah Bogor. I would like to presentation about why people laugh at certain events or sections of comedy movies or stand-up comedy. I do this activity to fulfill midterm tests of Pragmatics course. Alright everyone, let's move to the next slide. In second slide, there is the concept of Grecian maxim or cooperative principles. Conversational implicator and maxims. Conversational implicator is a nation devised by Paul Grace in 1975. It looks at the relation between what people say and what they actually mean in a conversation. Grace developed 4 maxims of conversation which describe what listener assume speech will be like. Implicator is defined as the implied meaning generated intentionally by the speaker. These meanings are often made covertly hidden using politeness strategies. See example research politeness theory. Example, John says, "Do you want to come to the pub?" Fred answers, "I'm washing my hair." In this example, it seems as though Fred isn't actually answering the question. He certainly doesn't actually say whether or not he will go to the pub with John. The implicator of his response, though, is that he isn't coming. He has conveyed a meaning intentionally without explicitly stating it. Let's move to the next slide. In the third slide, the cooperative principle is the collective name for Paul Grace's 4 conversational maxims which enable effective and cooperative conversation. Paul Grace came up with this not as a set of prescriptive rules that people should follow in conversation, but as a means of describing and analyzing the way people convey meaning in real-life interaction, namely 1. The maxim of quantity, giving only the necessary amount of information, not too much or too little. 2. The maxim of quality, only speaking the truth, not knowingly giving false information. 3. The maxim of relation, being relevant to the current topic of conversation. 4. The maxim of manner, avoiding ambiguity or obscurity in your speech. Let's move to the next slide. In the fourth slide, there is breaking maxim. The violation is committed in one of 2 ways. First, flouting overtly, obviously breaking a maxim. Second, violating covertly, secretly breaking a maxim. Both of these are done to achieve something in the course of the conversation. Let's move to the next slide. In the 5th slide, below are examples of maxims that are violated. First, based on the research of Maulida Ayu Puspasari and Listio Arianti, comparison study between Indonesian and American stand-up comedy. State University of Surabaya explains that an Indonesian comedian named Abdur Arshad and an American comedian named Kevin Hart are the most different kinds of ridicule influenced by their different nationalities and cultures. Kevin mostly violates the maxim of quantity because of the influence of American culture, which tends to be direct in communicating. Meanwhile, Abdur mostly violates the maxim of quality because of the influence of Indonesian culture, which tends to be indirect in communicating. Although the maxim they violate the most are different, their maxim violation also use all kinds of creating techniques to create humor. Let's move to the next slide. In the 6 slides, based on the research of Dian Hanung Singgi Prasetyo, difference of cooperation principles in stand-up comedy by woman comic in Indonesia from 2012 until June 2014, Yogyakarta State University 2015, the results of the study describe the form and purpose of deviation from the cooperative principle in stand-up comedy presented by female comics in Indonesia from 2012 until June 2014. The forms of deviation in the cooperative principle obtained include single maxim deviation and multiple maxim deviation. The deviation of the single maxim includes the deviation of the maxim of quantity, quality, relevance, and implementation. The multiple maxim deviations include quantity relevant maxim, quantity quality maxim, execution quantity maxim, and quality relevant maxim. The purpose of deviation from the principle of cooperation in stand-up comedy presented by female comics in Indonesia from 2012 until June 2014 is to make jokes and satire. Let's move to the next slide. In the 7 slides, there is the concept of humor or joke. Stand-up comedy. Solo comedian is a genre of comedic profession in which the comedian performs his jokes on stage alone, usually in front of a live audience. People who do this are called stand-up comedians, stand-up comics, or simply comics. Usually the comics present their material by monologue on a topic, bringing original or self-made material. Some also bringing general jokes. Sometimes there are several moves that require them to interact with the audience. Their jokes are usually done in cafes, recorded and then sold on DVD, the internet, or television. Let's move to the next slide. In the 8 slides, stand-up comedy terms. The jokes brought by the solo comedians are usually made by themselves. Stand-up comedy materials must be in the setup and punch format or may use other formats such as the rule of three. 1. Setup. Setup is the unfunny part of a joke bit that serves to lure the audience to their curiosity. When listening to the setup of a bit, the audience thinks of the first story, namely the viewer imagines or talks about the setup of a bit. Example setup. I really like buying shoes, blah 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 blah. Let's move to the next slide. In the 9th slides, there is punch. Punch is the funny part of a bit. Punch serves to deliver surprise to the audience. When listening to the punch of a bit, the audience thinks of a second story, namely the viewer's image or thoughts about the punch of a bit. Example of punch. Blah 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 blah. Because everywhere I buy shoes. Buy one get one free. Buy the left one and get the right one. Complete example of a bit. I really like buying shoes because everywhere I buy shoes, buy one get one free. Buy the left one and get the right one. Let's move to the next slide. In the 10 slides, there is rule of three. The rule of three is a bit format that gives 3 examples of something, but the third example is punch. Example of the rule of three. Every time I meet Bejo, I always want to look at, hug, blah blah blah. The punch is, then slapped him. Let's move to the next slide. The conclusion is, conversational implicator is a notion devised by Paul Grace in 1975. It looks at the relation between what people say and what they actually mean in a conversation. Grace developed 4 maxims of conversation, which describe what listeners assume speech will be like. Solo comedian is a genre of comedic profession in which the comedian performs his jokes on stage alone, usually in front of a live audience. People who do this are called stand-up comedians. In stand-up comedy, there is a violation of maxim principles. The violation is committed in one of 2 ways: flouting overtly, obviously, breaking a maxim, violating covertly, secretly, breaking a maxim. Both of these are done to achieve something in a conversation, of creating techniques to create humor. That's all my presentation. I'm sorry for my mistake. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.